Hey guys, tonight we take a long, slow walk through muddy trenches, lukewarm mugs in hand, and ration tins clinking somewhere near your knees. You're in a war zone, technically, but it smells more like burnt socks and overstewed black tea. There's frost forming at the edges of your helmet, the sky is a damp grey sheet stretched tight overhead, and someone's yelling about a kettle again. You're cold. You're tired. You've got your rations in one pocket and a damp book of matches in the other. There's no enemy in sight, just the eternal trudge of waiting, standing, sitting, then shifting a bit to keep the blood flowing. The only thing keeping you remotely human right now is the promise of a hot cup of something. Preferably strong. Definitely sweet. Maybe with a splash of milk powder if the lads haven't pinched it already. You probably won't survive this, if we're being honest. Not because of gunfire or grenades, but because you just tried to light a fire with wet twigs inside a steel helmet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is for you. I always love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts with your boots squelching softly in the muck. You duck beneath the lip of a trench wall, the sandbags above sagging like old pillows. Someone strung a bit of wire between two wooden stakes, probably to hang socks, but right now it's fluttering with 3 tea bags like little damp flags. A British soldier you barely know nods in your direction and shifts over to make space. You don't speak, because this is tea time. Not official tea time. There is no official tea time in war. But unofficially? Every hour can be tea hour, if you're clever or desperate enough. You fumble with your canteen, which is half full of lukewarm rainwater. There's a small, scorched mess tin hanging off your pack, and a lighter that may or may not work. You crouch beside your comrade, who's already getting a tiny flame going beneath a scrap of metal, a makeshift stove fashioned out of an old food tin, a few holes punched in the side. He fans it with a postcard from home. It's curling at the edges, but you don't ask who it was from. Everything is kindling now. The flame flickers, dances, smokes like an asthmatic dragon. You hold your tin above it like it's precious cargo, because it is. No one talks. The only sound is water beginning to hiss, and the quiet hope of something warm spreading through your chest. There's a smell now, burnt metal, dry leaves, maybe even a hint of onion from someone's stolen ration stew. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that faint promise of a proper cup. The British Army didn't exactly issue tea stoves. You were issued tea, yes. Black, dusty, bitter, but the act of making it? That was an art. And like most arts, it required a level of improvisation that would make a jazz musician weep. Technically, there's a field kitchen somewhere. A cook with a ladle and maybe even a coal-burning stove. But you are not there. You are here, ankle-deep in sludge, listening to a shell fall somewhere in the distance, and you're trying not to let your precious boiling water spill while someone lumbers past. Historians still argue whether the average British soldier was more devoted to tea or to their rifle. Many would say both were essential. But rifles jammed. Tea, well, tea soothed your nerves, warmed your fingers, reminded you, in the gentlest possible way, that you were still a person. Even if you hadn't changed your socks in 4 days. The Germans drank coffee. The Americans too, though they were often polite enough to accept tea when it was offered. The Russians had samovars and superstitions, the Italians had espresso, somehow, and the Japanese, well, they had green tea rituals you could write poetry about. But the British? They had a trench, a tin cup, and a collective obsession. You finally reach a boil, just. A few bubbles crowd the bottom of your tin. You toss in a coarse, flat tea bag, the kind that looks like someone accidentally stepped on it during packing. You don't care. The water darkens almost immediately. There's a satisfying swirl, a smell that, miraculously, cuts through the mud and sweat. Someone nearby offers you a pinch of sugar from his sock. You hesitate for half a second, then take it. War makes philosophers of us all. Now comes the stirring. You forgot a spoon. So you use a stick. Or the end of a clean bullet casing. Doesn't matter. Just something to move the leaves around, get the flavor going. There's no milk today. But yesterday, someone stole a can of condensed milk from a passing supply truck and shared it out like it was gold. The tin's hot now. You wrap a bit of cloth around your hand and lift it, carefully, sipping from the edge. It burns, just a little. But it's good. Better than good. It's yours. And in this exact moment, with a bit of steam fogging your vision, you could almost believe you're sitting in your mum's garden, hearing the kettle whistle from the kitchen window. Except there's a dead rat floating in the latrine trench and someone's just started shouting about lice. Again. Still, you sip. One of the lesser-known fringe tales from the trenches involves a company in northern France that supposedly held a tea truce. For 20 minutes each morning, both sides agreed, silently, informally, and entirely illegally, to not shoot while soldiers brewed their tea. No records confirm this. But letters from both German and British soldiers mention the odd morning when all went still and the only sounds were kettles rattling and spoons clinking. Make of that what you will. Back in your trench, someone offers you a biscuit. It's rock hard, but you're grateful. Dipping it into your tin, it softens enough to bite. Crumbs fall into your drink, but it's fine. Extra texture. You chew slowly, the world around you retreating into soft, muted tones. Even the occasional crack of rifle fire feels distant. Like a sound effect from someone else's movie. You lean back against the wall, close your eyes just for a second. Your boots are soaked, your uniform smells like mildew, and you haven't shaved in a week. But you've got warmth in your belly, tannins on your tongue, and the strange, sleepy sense that, at least for the next 10 minutes, you can keep going. You don't know this yet, but you'll remember this tea for years. More than the orders. More than the uniforms. More than the blurred chaos of movement and command. You'll remember the taste. The heat. The way it made you feel, even just briefly, like everything might be okay. And then, of course, someone spills theirs. You open your eyes, sigh, and offer your tin to share. Because that's trench etiquette. You slosh a bit of your tea into your mate's cup without being asked. That's the rule, never let a man go tealess if you've got enough to share. He nods, grateful, and you both sip quietly under the sagging tarpaulin that's doing a terrible job at pretending to be a roof. The sky has turned from light grey to dark grey, which is basically trench speak for even colder now. The cup in your hands is tin, dented, and burned on one edge where it's been too close to fire too many times. It might have once belonged to a man named Jackson. Or Hughes. Or a bloke they just called Legs, for reasons no one explains. Cups go missing, get borrowed, passed along. But the ritual doesn't change. Now let's back up, because while you're huddled in the mud, barely able to feel your toes, the very concept of soldier plus tea equals mission success didn't just emerge from soggy socks and stubborn optimism. No, there's a long and slightly ridiculous history to the British Army's relationship with tea, a story so ingrained that it practically got a chapter in the manual. By the time World War II broke out in 1939, British troops were already deeply devoted to their daily brew. Tea had become the military's unofficial morale strategy, just as effective, some would argue, as a good pair of boots or a sturdy rifle. And yes, there were actual orders concerning tea. You weren't just allowed to make it, you were practically encouraged, if not expected. Take the mobile tea units, for instance. These were real things, vans or makeshift trucks that roamed through bombed-out areas during the Blitz and beyond, distributing tea to soldiers and civilians alike. Imagine that, an entire arm of support staff dedicated to the art of warm beverages. These weren't just glorified food trucks. They were mobile lifelines of comfort and caffeine, staffed largely by volunteers, often women, who handed out cups of tea with soft voices and tired smiles. And then there's the NAFI, the Navy, Army, and Air Force Institutes, essentially the military's in-house tea supplier, pub substitute, and shop on wheels. NAFI ensured that no matter where a soldier was stationed, whether in Tobruk, Calcutta, or on a windswept outpost in the Hebrides, he'd have a shot at a brew. Packets of loose-leaf tea were issued, sometimes with sugar, often without milk, and always with the assumption that you'd figure out the rest. Historians still argue whether the obsession with tea helped sustain discipline or simply served as a coping mechanism. One school of thought suggests the daily ritual helped soldiers maintain a shred of normalcy, a psychological anchor in a world spinning wildly off its axis. Another camp says it was less about ritual and more about addiction, the sheer number of cups consumed per man per day bordered on the heroic. We're talking 6 to 8 cups daily, even in combat zones. Not leisurely cups, either. We're talking squatting on an ammo box while a mortar goes off cups. And then came the brew up. You'll hear this phrase a lot. It's not some formal gathering or a dainty clinking of china. No, a brew up is what happens anytime soldiers have 15 seconds of peace, a bit of dry fuel, and a match that actually works. You make tea. Always. Commanders learn to account for this. They expected brew-up delays. There's a story of one sergeant yelling "move out," only to have the entire squad pause long enough to pour out their tins, stash their sugar, and douse the flame with spit. Priorities. Of course, not all nations understood this tea devotion. When American forces began arriving in the European theater, they were perplexed. Coffee was their drink of choice, fast, bitter, industrial. The British, meanwhile, looked upon that muddy liquid with equal confusion. "Can't you taste the ash?" one Tommy allegedly asked. "They burn the beans on purpose," another muttered, as if describing some form of ritual blasphemy. But the British Army's dedication to the leaf went deeper than taste. Tea was a logistical miracle. It was hydrating, well, mostly. It was calming, even with the caffeine. And most crucially, it masked the flavor of bad water. Boil it up, toss in the tea, and suddenly that slightly greenish trench water didn't taste quite so murderous. It wasn't perfect. But it was something. You remember hearing about a unit in North Africa that got so desperate for tea leaves, they started drying out used bags on rocks and rebrewing them. 3, 4, 5 times. Eventually, the tea gave up and just turned into lightly flavored dust. Still, they drank it. Quirky fact, the army eventually started packaging tea with sugar in one single ration cube. Compressed. Stackable. Breakable with a bayonet. If that's not military-grade tea, what is? You shift in the trench again, your back aching. The tea's mostly gone now, just a faint brown line around the inside of your mug. You tap it out, saving the bag. Always save the bag. It might get used again, or traded, or, if someone's feeling superstitious, tucked into the lining of a cap for good luck. Which brings us to the question of tea rituals. Yes, even in the chaos of war, people had preferences. Some liked it jet black. Others wanted it to sit for exactly 2 minutes. Still others swore by the one swirl and done method. Fights have started over worse. And of course, there was etiquette. If someone offered you tea, you took it. Refusing was bad form unless you were bleeding, unconscious, or under enemy fire. Even then, you might take a sip. One fringe habit seen in a few isolated platoons. Tea rank assignments. Senior soldiers claimed first brew rights. A new recruit? You made the tea, served it, and hoped someone didn't toss their cup back with, "Too weak, try again." If you were lucky, you moved up the tea ladder. If not, well, you'd be stuck stirring for weeks. Meanwhile, the officers pretended not to notice this unofficial chain of command. Technically, everyone got the same rations. But in reality? The tea god smiled on some more than others. You reach into your pocket, feeling for your ration tin. Still there. The tea wrapped in wax paper, the sugar clumped like small stones. It's enough for one more brew. And in the distance, barely audible over the low wind, you hear someone mutter those sacred words. "Time for another cup, mate." Of course it is. You nod, already reaching for the mess tin. It's a bit crusty from last time, some charred black around the base, a ghost of stew's past stuck to one side, but that's standard. No one in the trenches has time to scrub cookware. Every layer of grime just adds flavor. That's the unofficial belief, anyway. You search around for fuel. Your mate offers up some cardboard, and someone else produces a bit of dried cloth that used to be part of a sock. You've learned not to ask questions. It burns, doesn't it? That's all that matters. Now comes the dangerous bit, lighting the flame. The wind has picked up, a gentle but persistent whisper that keeps slipping its cold fingers down the back of your collar. You hunch lower, shielding the flame with your hands like it's the last ember on earth. It flickers. Catches. Stays. You are now engaged in the ancient martial art of boiling water under fire, literal and figurative. This part's tricky. You've probably read about tactical maneuvers and battlefield strategy, but no one ever explains how to keep a fire going in a soggy trench while someone 3 positions down insists on stomping around like a one-man cavalry charge. The art of the trench brew demands a particular skill set, patience, timing, and a spiritual connection with damp sticks. Historians still argue whether it was better to brew fast with low-quality fuel or slow-cook your cup with scavenged coal and risk a mortar strike. No one's done a full thesis yet, but the debate lingers. Some soldiers got clever. They built windbreaks out of biscuit tins, piled sandbags to shelter the flame, even dug miniature holes, trench-in-a-trench setups, where fires could be hidden from snipers and the wind. These were known, unofficially, as brew bunkers. Then there was the matter of the actual stove, or rather, the lack thereof. Unless you were lucky enough to be near a field kitchen, and let's be honest, you rarely were, your cooking appliance was whatever could be bent, folded, or nailed into a container vaguely resembling a cup holder. That's where the Benghazi burner enters the scene. Despite the name, it wasn't only used in North Africa. It became a beloved, Yankee staple across multiple theaters of war. What it was, essentially, was an empty petrol can, chopped open and filled with sand or dirt soaked in fuel. Light it, and you'd have a small, hot flame, perfect for boiling water if you didn't mind the occasional gasoline aftertaste. Soldiers made hundreds of these, often improving them with vents and metal plates, turning a battlefield into a sprawling pop-up cafe, one burner at a time. Sure, they were unstable. Yes, they occasionally exploded. But when you're freezing and your fingers are numb, you accept that risk in pursuit of your next brew. There's even a lesser-known variant called the Futomi cooker. Officially issued. Supposedly. A small, fold-out contraption meant to run on solid fuel tablets. In theory, it was brilliant. In practice? It was so slow to boil that men joked it only worked during peacetime. Put on the kettle, and we'll storm the beach in 3 hours. You've tried all of them by now. Most recently, you used a metal helmet turned upside down, filled with coals, and balanced your mug on a rock inside. It worked beautifully. Until someone stepped on it during a night scramble. Now, you're working with a bent tin and the smallest sliver of match flame. It's kind of romantic, if you squint, 2 men crouched together, shoulders touching, staring into a fire like cavemen reinventing soup. Except instead of saber-toothed tigers, you've got artillery and trench foot. And yet, there's something deeply calming about this moment. The hiss of heating water. The comforting smell of scorched tea leaves. The fact that you are doing something so utterly, beautifully normal in the least normal place on earth. Quirky tip someone once passed down, you can add a pinch of salt to the water to help it boil slightly faster. It changes the taste a bit, makes it odd, almost like you've added a whisper of seawater to your drink, but when time is tight and patience thinner than your rations, it's a worthwhile trade. You drop in your tea. The bag hits the water like a small ship sinking gracefully, leaving behind clouds of darkness. You swirl it gently, counting in your head. 1, 2, you lose track around 7 because someone nearby curses and tosses their whole burner into the trench mud. They weren't patient enough. That's the first lesson of tea making in wartime, haste ruins the cup. You're waiting again, breathing in the smell. It's sharp but soothing, earthy and bitter with that familiar edge of comfort. In civilian life, tea might have been optional. Here, it's medicine. Not medically approved, of course, but mentally? Spiritually? Entirely essential. You look around, noticing the quiet transformation happening in the trench. Men who were grumbling a moment ago have gone still. A few smiles. Someone's even started humming, not a song, just a tune, like the kind you'd hear your nan sing while doing dishes. Tea has that effect. It's a diffuser of tension. A bringer of pause. For the span of one mug's warmth, everything becomes manageable. You're not stuck in a filthy trench during one of history's bloodiest conflicts. You're just having a cuppa. Somewhere out there, just over the ridge, perhaps, a German soldier might be doing the same. Brewing chicory root coffee or whatever substitute they've come up with. And for a brief moment, the war seems absurd. You're all just people trying to warm your hands on something that doesn't explode. There's a joke making the rounds, started with the engineers, probably, about how the quickest way to end the war is to cut off the tea supply. 1 week without and we'll all surrender out of despair. Everyone laughs when it's told. Then they get very quiet. Because it's not entirely untrue. You lift your mug. Take a slow sip. It's too hot, but that's how you like it. The steam clings to your nose, your upper lip, curling under your helmet strap. You feel it travel down your throat, heat blossoming across your chest. You let out a sigh that feels like it's been waiting all day to escape. Someone claps you on the back and says, "Perfect, innit?" And you can't help but agree. You're still holding the tin mug, now warm in your hands, the tea inside just beginning to cool from scalding to sip safe. The trench has shifted moods again, less tense now, more companionable, the kind of stillness that doesn't last long but feels golden while it does. Overhead, the sky remains stubbornly grey, as if it's trying to outdo your tea in sheer dreariness. The mug, slightly dented on one side, carries the faint memory of countless previous brews. A bit of grit at the bottom. No one mentions it. It's just part of the ritual. You swirl it once, for no reason, then let it settle. There's a kind of poetry to this pause, an everyday act made sacred by its absurd context. And that brings you to the objects that make this all possible, the strange, slapped together, often explosive contraptions that powered the entire operation, the Dixie and the Benghazi burner. Now, we've already touched on the Benghazi burner, but let's get cozy with its clunky cousin, the Dixie. To clarify, a Dixie isn't a person. It's a pot. A large, lidded, battered cooking vessel used for everything from stew to socks. In peacetime, it might have been used to cook Sunday lunch for a church group. In wartime, it became the beating heart of field kitchens and squad brews alike. The Dixie pot was made of thick aluminum or tin, capable of withstanding the direct wrath of fire, rain, or the occasional board rifle butt. In field kitchens, it simmered porridge, stew, or whatever food-like matter the cooks had scraped together. But in more intimate company, it became the communal teapot. You'd brew a batch big enough for the whole section, or at least the ones lucky enough to be on rotation. The key was managing the boil. Overboil, and you lost half the tea. Underboil, and someone would accuse you of weak steeping, which, frankly, was a more grievous crime than poor marksmanship. Now, in the absence of a full field setup, the Dixie often partnered with the infamous Benghazi burner. If you had both, you were a king. If not, you had to improvise, which led to an entire unofficial engineering subculture in the army. One popular modification was turning an empty ammo box into a tea boiler. Fill it with sand, add petrol, punch a few holes, voila, your own trench cafe. Soldiers who were especially proud of their devices sometimes gave them names. Old Smoky. The Sizzler. Gertrude. One corporal even painted racing stripes on his. Historians still argue whether this kind of field engineering was officially encouraged or merely tolerated. Officers sometimes turned a blind eye to the more explosive prototypes. Other times, they'd confiscate them as fire hazards, only to be found quietly using them later on when no one was looking. And it wasn't just British soldiers getting in on the act. Australian troops were especially infamous for their tea ingenuity. One unit in Tobruk reportedly set up a whole brew schedule, rotating duties around tea prep like a sacred shift. Their burner was nicknamed the Tobruk Inferno, and it burned through for cooking tins and 2 shirt sleeves before being retired. The Americans, as usual, were fascinated and slightly horrified. "You're making tea on that?" one GI reportedly asked, gesturing to what looked like a rusted bucket propped up on rocks and what might have been part of a bicycle. "Works better than your Jeep," the Brit had replied. Now, not everyone used Benghazi burners or Dixes. Some just used their mess tins. They'd set them on hot rocks, bury coals underneath, or balance them precariously over open flames. Sometimes, a bit of string or wire was used as a handle extender, especially when the pot got too hot to grab. You recall one evening in Italy, muddy hillside, no firewood, cold wind tearing through your coat. The usual nonsense. A soldier in your unit, Wilkinson, decided he was going to make tea using nothing but a candle and a ration tin. It took him 45 minutes. But by the end of it, he had 1 cup of barely warm tea and the unshakable respect of the entire platoon. He called it his patient's brew. Another lad once tried to rig up a tea-making system with rainwater collected in a helmet, funneled through a sock, and boiled using shrapnel that had been left on a stove overnight. The end result? Metallic. Slightly sour. But still, technically, tea. And if your burner broke or ran out of fuel, you scavenged. Bit of wood here. A slice of cardboard there. You even remember one soldier who swore that newspaper soaked in bacon grease made the perfect fire starter. It smelled awful, but the flame held steady. It wasn't just about boiling the water, though. It was about the control. The balance. Keep the flame too low, and you'd be here until next Thursday. Too high, and you'd be scraping blackened tea residue off your cup for a week. And sometimes, despite your best efforts, the entire burner would collapse mid-brew, tipping scalding tea onto your boots and sole. You'd just start again. Because that's what you do. Quirky fringe fact, in the Western Desert campaigns, some soldiers rigged up solar tea makers, basically, blackened tin set on rocks that absorbed heat all day. By sundown, the water was just hot enough to steep. Not exactly piping hot, but better than nothing. Unless a jackal ran off with your tin, which apparently happened more than once. Eventually, you become almost supernaturally attuned to your burner. You know the exact scent of near boil. You recognize the sound of sputtering fuel. You can tell, just by watching the flicker of flame, whether the tea will be strong or weak. You may not know where the next ration truck is. You may not know when the next shell will fall. But you know this tea. It's done now, gently bubbling, dark and fragrant, the kind of brew that makes grown men close their eyes after the first sip. You pour carefully, the steam curling up your sleeves. Your mates gather close. Cups out. Quiet anticipation. No one jostles. No one jokes. Not yet. Because this is ceremony. Strange, war-torn, soot-covered ceremony. You hand out the cups, nod once, then lift your own and drink. It tastes like home. It tastes like now. You exhale softly, letting the steam from your mug rise into the space between your face and the cold. The first sip hits your tongue like a warm handshake, reassuring, a little rough, and probably wearing gloves. It's strong. Not because of any brewing genius on your part, but because you've used twice the recommended amount of tea. Again. You'll regret it later when the caffeine kicks in and your bladder wakes you at 3 a.m., but right now, it feels right. And of course, it's sweet. Painfully sweet. Welcome to the world of milk powder and morale, a battlefield pairing as unlikely as it is beloved. By now you've accepted that trench tea rarely tastes like the stuff back home. It's not about perfection. It's about chemistry, sometimes literally. Because what you're drinking isn't just tea. It's tea plus milk substitute, plus sugar, plus the faint trace of rust from a decades-old mess tin. Let's talk milk, because this bit gets weird. You weren't issued fresh milk. That would be absurd. Even the cows were busy. What you got instead was powdered or condensed milk, small cans if you were lucky, sealed sachets if you were typical. The powdered version came in neat beige packets that tore open like old envelopes and smelled faintly of cardboard and childhood disappointment. Add it to tea, and you got a pale swirl that was almost comforting. Almost. The condensed stuff, on the other hand, was like pouring syrup into your mug. Sweet, sticky, and completely unnatural, but so beloved that men would trade socks for it. One soldier swore it cured his trench cough. Another used it to style his moustache. You don't judge. Sugar, too, was gold. Issued in cubes or loose in cloth-wrapped lumps, sugar was never around long enough to properly inventory. One moment it was in your pocket, the next it was mysteriously borrowed by someone from C Company with a suspiciously sweet breath. Historians still argue whether the high sugar content in wartime tea was a practical measure or a psychological crutch. Some say it offered a critical calorie boost. Others claim it was simply the only way to disguise the often metallic taste of field-brewed water. The truth, as usual, is probably both. And then there were the debates. Oh, the endless, exhausting debates about how to make tea properly. Milk first or tea first? One swirl or three? Do you squeeze the bag, or is that blasphemy? These arguments have existed for centuries, but throw in the stress of daily shellfire and the dwindling contents of your ration tin, and you've got yourself a battleground more heated than El Alamein. You remember Thompson, a man so devoted to tea purity that he once slapped a fellow soldier's hand away mid-stir. You've murdered it, he declared solemnly, tipping the whole mug into the mud. For the rest of the week, he drank only water in morning. Then there was Patel, a medic who carried his own spice sachets, a mix of cinnamon, clove, and cardamom. He'd sneak them into the brew during long night watches, handing out what he called chai for the soul. It wasn't regulation, but no one cared. Especially not after a week of rain-soaked boots and boiled turnips. Quirky anecdote time, there's a recorded account of one unit in Greece that became so addicted to sweet tea that they began adding jam in place of sugar when supplies ran out. Apricot, mostly. Marmalade if things got desperate. The resulting brew was sticky, strange, and utterly unforgettable. You never tried it yourself, though someone once offered. You politely declined. Even trench etiquette has limits. You take another sip. The tea's cooled now, no longer scalding, but warm enough to chase the chill from your ribs. You can feel it spreading down your chest, like someone's thrown a heated blanket across your insides. There's something about this moment, this exact moment, that feels bizarrely civilized. You're ankle-deep in mud, you haven't washed properly in 4 days, and your rifle is one bad turn away from jamming again. But here you are, holding a cup, discussing sugar ratios with a man who once ate a beetle on a dare. You glance at your mess tin. There's enough water for one more round. Someone volunteers to tend the burner, and a quiet little dance begins, rinsing tins, remeasuring leaves, passing around what's left of the milk powder. Everyone moves a bit slower now, more careful, more deliberate. Tea has a way of slowing the world down. That's its superpower. At some point, you hear someone behind you humming a half-remembered tune. Another joins in, off-key but bold. It's a song from home, maybe. Or one someone's gran used to sing while washing dishes. The lyrics are nonsense by now, distorted by time and distance. But the rhythm? That's still intact. Your second cup is sweeter. Someone had a sugar hoard. You don't ask where it came from. And now, a sudden gust of wind knocks a tin over. Everyone groans. The flame flickers. Someone curses. Someone else shields it with their coat. The flame survives. You all exhale. In the trenches, this is what passes for high drama. Tea almost ruined. Then saved. Cheers all around. You take another sip and realize. This is one of those stories you'll tell one day. Not about the battle. Not the heroics or the horror. But this tin cup. This warmth. This absurd, beautiful fight for just 5 minutes of peace and sweetness in a world gone sideways. Somewhere in the dark, a kettle whistles. Not yours, probably the field kitchen's. But it's a good sign. Means the next rotation might bring soup. Or another round of tea. You drain the last of your cup and shake it out. The grounds cling stubbornly to the bottom. You scrub them with your sleeve. Good enough. You hand your mug to the next guy. He smiles. Brewing begins again. The trench is quieter now. Not silent, never that, but settled, like an old house shifting in its sleep. You sit with your back against the cold dirt wall, mug balanced on your knee, and your fingers wrapped loosely around the handle. It's empty now, but the warmth lingers in the metal and in your chest. Someone down the line mutters, "Camouflage the flame," and the faint sound of tin being shuffled and reshuffled clinks through the air. Another voice, even lower, "Too much smoke." No one's panicking. Just adapting. Because here's the secret they never put in the manuals: tea is both comfort and camouflage. Sure, it warms you up. Sure, it keeps you human when everything around you screams machine. But it also offers something much more tactical: the moment. A breath. And yes, a bit of cover, if you're smart about it. You remember the first time someone told you to hide your flame. It was a grimy sergeant, all eyebrows and attitude, who barked, "If Jerry can see your kettle smoke, you'll get tea with shrapnel in it." Not exactly the advice you grew up hearing, but it stuck. So now, every brew is also a stealth operation. Burners are built low, hidden between sandbags or inside dugouts. A few clever lads learn to dig tea pits, little foxhole side carves where fires could flicker unseen, the smoke funneled sideways or capped with damp cloth to muffle the rise. Historians still argue whether tea-related fire discipline actually prevented enemy detection or was just a ritual of perceived safety. Either way, the belief in the power of an invisible flame was strong. And you can't deny, tea time altered trench behavior. Troops on both sides often showed an uncanny respect for the ritual. There were stretches, brief and strange, when the gunfire stopped. Sometimes for repairs. Sometimes for weather. But occasionally, for tea. There's one story, probably apocryphal, but you love it anyway, about a quiet corner of the line in Italy. British on one side, Germans on the other. Both dug in, both exhausted. Around 3 p.m., every day for a week, both sides would mysteriously go quiet. No shots, no movement, no flares. Just stillness. Then, 15 minutes later, as if on cue, everything resumed. Word spread. Someone in command caught wind and tried to confirm it. He asked, "Why the silence?" The reply? "We think they're brewing as well, sir." Would be rude to interrupt. No one ever confirmed the truth. But it became legend, the mutual brew ceasefire. You'd like to believe it. And truth be told, that sort of logic makes perfect sense out here. A shared moment over hot leaves and cold steel. No translation necessary. But not every tea time was so serene. Sometimes the brew was what gave you away. You remember a night in Belgium, cold, dark, and deathly still. You dug out a burner inside a disused ammo crate, fashioned a lid from a mess tin. You were just getting a proper boil when a tiny puff of smoke slipped through a crack and spiraled into the air like a traitor. Moments later, crack. A bullet punched through the top of the crate. No one was hit. The tea, however, was lost. The soldier beside you, a lanky bloke named Fenton, just stared down at the scattered leaves and muttered, "Tea's down, lads. Might as well pack it in." Quirky detail you'd never believe if you hadn't seen it, some unit started carrying tea-colored cloth, dyed brownish-gray and draped over steam to mask both color and scent. An officer with a flair for the dramatic called it stealth steeping. Others got even sneakier. You once watched a fellow hide a burning candle inside an empty ration tin, using it as a tiny, nearly invisible boiler. It took nearly an hour to heat the water. But it worked. Tastes of candle, he admitted. But it's hot. And then there was the time one of the lads decided to blend the two great British wartime arts, tea and trickery. He placed a dummy burner, full of grass and socks soaked in oil, on the far side of the trench wall, letting the smoke curl into the open air like bait. Moments later, a sniper opened fire on the decoy while the real kettle quietly boiled in the opposite direction. You toasted that cup like it was a bottle of champagne. It wasn't all games, though. Sometimes, tea was the only thing that kept you still, forced you to stop, even if just for 5 minutes. Forced you to crouch, focus, and wait. And in waiting, maybe you listened a little harder. Maybe you noticed the drone of a plane, the footfall of boots that didn't sound familiar, or the glint of a rifle on a ridge. Tea slowed you down just enough to stay alive. And then, there's the practical side. Tea wasn't just morale in a mug, it was also hydration. Dirty water boiled was better than dirty water drunk straight. Add some tannin-rich leaves, a dash of sugar, and you had something passably safe-ish. Of course, that safety went out the window if you were caught mid-brew during an advance. You once saw a man attempt to finish steeping his tea while running from an incoming shell. He held his mess tin like a sacred relic, ducked behind a wall, finished his drink, then calmly shouted, "Worth it." Was it? You're honestly still not sure. What you do know is this: in the trenches, the best defense is often routine. And tea became that. The anchor. The pause between shellings. The signal that for just a blink of time, you were more than mud and metal. And maybe, just maybe, you could finish your cup before the sky lit up again. You shift your legs. The last of the tea is gone. Someone's already preparing for the next batch, crouched low with a sardine tin stuffed full of paraffin and dry cloth. You glance around, watching the flickers of orange and the curling smoke lines that hug the ground like whispers. The trench has become a strange constellation of tiny fires and tired faces, all illuminated by the glow of boiling water and impossible hope. And through it all, silence. Not a ceasefire, but a truce of sorts. Between the chaos and the cup. You breathe deep. The smoke smells like home. Your boots squelch as you shift positions again, the sludge beneath you colder now, thicker. You pull your coat tighter. There's no wind tonight, but the damp is settling into your bones like it's signing a long-term lease. And in moments like this, when the world feels wet, grey, and timeless, you think of the worst kind of brewing conditions, when the kettle froze. Winter in the trenches wasn't just cold. It was quiet, eerie, and mean. The kind of cold that didn't shout, it whispered, slow and cruel. It worked its way under your collar, behind your knees, into your fingers, then pretended to leave, only to come back worse. Making tea in this weather? An act of blind optimism. Your canteen water is solid at the top, a thin crust of ice like the lid on a frosty pudding. You have to jab it with the end of your bayonet to break through. It cracks with a sound that's almost offensive, too sharp, too loud for the fog that muffles everything else. Then you collect snow. It's the only real option. You scoop it into your mess tin, watching it melt slow and stubborn, like it knows how precious it is. The trick is not overfilling. Too much snow, and you'll be waiting till spring. You crouch beside the makeshift burner. Tonight it's a bent ration tin filled with solid fuel tablets and someone's sock serving as a windbreak. You light it with numb fingers, your matches dry only because someone wrapped them in waxed paper and tied them with a bit of string like they were birthday presents. Quirky trick from a Polish soldier you met once: hold the matches under your armpit for a minute before striking. Body heat makes fire stronger, he said. You never forgot that. The flame catches. The snow begins to sweat, then weep, then collapse into a puddle in the bottom of the tin. You watch every drop, eyes stinging from the cold. This is tea making at its most primal. No leaf yet. No milk. No sugar. Just water in the making. It takes longer in the cold. Everything does. Historians still argue whether soldiers adapted better to winter conditions or simply endured them with the help of boiling rituals like this. After all, tea was one of the few warm things available. You couldn't count on a dry bed. Or a full belly. But if you could manage a flame, you could manage a brew. You remember that winter on the Rhine, snow packed so deep it formed walls. The trench became a maze of white corridors. No birds. No gunfire. Just crunching boots and clouds of breath. One morning, you woke to find a cup frozen solid to your coat. That same week, a corporal invented a method for brewing tea inside his greatcoat. He tied a mess tin to a strap across his chest, used a tiny candle inside his helmet to boil the water, and steeped the leaves under his scarf. It smelled faintly of paraffin and bravery. He called it chest brew. Offered sips for a price, usually socks or chocolate. That's the thing about wartime cold, it made capitalists of everyone. You also remember the German soldier across no man's land who once shouted, "Feuerpause für tea." Fire pause for tea. No one responded. But no one shot either. For an hour. That was a strange morning. The snow fell in silent sheets. A few soldiers on both sides stood up, just briefly, stretching arms, cracking backs. Then someone struck a match, and the air shimmered with the scent of smoke and boiled leaves. No one spoke. No one fired. You just brewed. It wasn't kindness. It was mutual exhaustion. But it did the trick. Another odd story, you're not sure if it's myth or memory, involves a Russian scout during a particularly brutal frost. He brewed tea using melted icicles and birch bark, steeping it in an empty grenade casing cleaned with vodka. The taste? Explosive, he said, deadpan. You raise your mug again now, tea finally finished. You're proud of this one, it took effort. A solid 20 minutes from ice to sip. Your reward is modest, slightly weak, slightly too hot, slightly metallic. But it's yours. You pass what's left to the new lad, frost still in his eyebrows. He thanks you like you just saved his life. You probably did. Tea in the cold does more than warm the hands. It wakes the lungs. Keeps the soul supple. You feel it now, a slow stretch inside your chest, like your ribs are remembering what it feels like to be okay. And then, like always, the cold reminds you who's in charge. Your fingers sting. Your lips crack. The wind, silent till now, slips down your back like a whispered dare. Somewhere nearby, ice groans. The trench creaks. A tin falls with a hollow thud. Time to pack up. The burner goes out with a puff. You bury the ashes in a snowdrift. Tin in your coat. Mug in your belt. You glance once at the sky, the stars, shockingly clear. Like someone scrubbed them clean. You wonder if anyone else is looking up. Probably not. They're probably just trying to keep their kettle from freezing over. The cold is starting to bite again, especially now that the fire's gone out. Your hands work on muscle memory, packing away the mess tin, adjusting your scarf, rubbing warmth into your knuckles. But your mind is somewhere else. It drifts, as it often does between shifts, into stranger territory. Not about strategy, or supply lines, or what the general might be shouting from some faraway map room. No, your thoughts wander somewhere softer. Because tonight, as you wrap up the last of your tea kit, someone nearby leans in and asks, quietly, almost shyly, do you ever read your tea leaves? You blink. He's serious. Welcome to the curious world of trench superstition. And the strange case of tea leaf divination. It seems absurd at first. The war is all around you. The world is on fire. And yet, here in the muck, someone still thinks a few soggy leaves at the bottom of a tin cup can tell the future. And here's the secret, sometimes, so do you. You've seen it happen. After the brew's done, after the cup's drained, a soldier turns his tin just so, examining the wet flecks stuck to the bottom. He tilts it to the light, or what passes for it in the gloom. Maybe it's a shape. A line. A blotch that vaguely resembles a rabbit, or a boot, or, if someone's feeling generous, a lucky star. Historians still argue whether this habit was widespread or just something soldiers did to pass time. But you've seen it enough to know it was real and more common than folks back home might think. It wasn't always serious. Most of the time, it was a joke. "Looks like you'll get extra jam tomorrow," someone would say, pointing at a particularly round blob. Or, "That's clearly a tank. You're driving it. Promotion incoming." But sometimes, it felt heavier. Once, you saw McAllister, a man not known for whimsy, stare silently into his empty mug for nearly 5 minutes. When asked what he saw, he just whispered, "My dad's boots," and walked off. Another time, a Welsh private named Hugh saw a shape that looked like a dove and swore it meant he'd survive the next push. He did. Barely. Came back with a limp and a story about how a collapsed trench shielded him from a shell. He kept the tin. Still looked at it like it held something sacred. You try it now, almost without thinking. The bottom of your cup is coated in that familiar layer of murky sediment. You tilt it slightly. A few clumps slide, then stick. Nothing magical. Just shapes. Patterns. But still, you can't help seeing something. Is that a ship? A bird? A loaf of bread? Or is it just your imagination filling in the gaps? Doesn't matter. Because in this world, imagination is armor. You remember hearing about a whole unit stationed in the highlands of Tunisia who took tea leaf reading deadly seriously. Each night, after brew up, they'd pass their cups to a designated reader, a grizzled corporal with one eye and a deep love of Shakespeare. He'd swirl, tilt, squint, and then announce the result like he was unveiling a royal decree. Reinforcements tomorrow. Leave coming your way. Enemies digging in. Or, famously, you'll trip over your bootlace and drop your pudding. Which, to be fair, actually happened. These little predictions became something more than jokes. They were gentle lies that soothed bruised nerves. Hopes disguised as folklore. And sometimes, just sometimes, they were eerily accurate. Quirky side note, a small group of soldiers from South Africa carried tiny ceramic cups, brought from home, specifically for this kind of reading. Unlike the battered mess tins everyone else used, these cups had white interiors. Perfect for seeing patterns. They guarded them fiercely, wrapping them in socks and tucking them into kit bags like they were family heirlooms. One even claimed his grandmother taught him to read them properly, and for a packet of sugar or a slice of bully beef, he'd do a reading for you. His prediction for you, weeks ago, was, "There's a cold stretch coming. And something sweet. Save your matches." You chuckled at the time. Then the weather turned. And you found a forgotten fruit bar behind a crate 2 days later. Coincidence? Maybe. But you still saved your matches. Of course, not everyone believed. "If I wanted to be lied to," Jenkins once said, "I'd write to my old school headmaster and ask how I was doing." Fair point. But even Jenkins, old cynic that he was, would glance into his mug now and then when he thought no one was looking. And that's the thing about hope. It doesn't need much space to grow. A few soggy leaves at the bottom of a tin? Plenty. You tilt your cup one more time. A few flecks shift. Still nothing obvious. But you feel calmer, somehow. Like the world has been reduced to shapes and swirls, and you can choose what they mean. You let your thoughts wander a little further, past the trench wall, past the next ridge, past the lines drawn on someone's map. Maybe one day, this war ends. Maybe you're sitting in a real chair, at a real table, with a real teapot. Someone pours. You laugh. The tea is warm, and the leaves at the bottom say, "You made it." You'd like that. You'd very much like that. A soft clatter pulls you back. Someone's readying the next brew. You hand over your tin. It's still warm. You don't mention what you saw, or didn't. Some things are best left unsaid. Or unread. But you smile, just a little, and say, "Keep an eye on the leaves, yeah? They've been talkative lately." The man laughs. The water begins to boil. And just like that, the next prediction steeps. You're perched now on an overturned ammo box, boots steaming faintly from their recent near immersion in the latrine trench. The next round of tea is brewing a few feet away, the flames surprisingly cooperative for once. Around you, the trench hums with the low rustle of coats, the distant clink of a spade, and the eternal rhythm of soldiers muttering about socks, stews, and sleep. You think you've seen it all when it comes to wartime tea, but then someone mentions the tea mule of Italy. It starts like all good trench tales do, with a bit of bread, a burned tongue, and someone going, "You remember old Corporal Bentley and that daft donkey?" You listen because, well, it's either that or stare at a wall made of frozen mud and regret. Turns out, the story's not just rumor. In the winter of 1943, somewhere in the upper ridges of the Apennines, a British artillery unit had been stationed for weeks on a slope so steep that most supply wagons couldn't reach it. The trails were narrow, icy, and constantly at risk of being shelled or simply falling off the side of the mountain. Vehicles? Useless. Horses? Spooked. Enter Muriel. Yes, Muriel. A short-legged, ill-tempered mule with a gait like a shopping trolley with a bad wheel. She was part of a small pack team reassigned from a supply depot, and while the others carted ammo, blankets, or medical supplies, Muriel's burden was unique, a pair of battered kettles and a crate of loose-leaf tea. Not assigned. Not requested. But insisted upon. Corporal Bentley, who swore he'd trained as a tea boy back home in Devon, had declared tea the only reliable medicine for altitude-related despair. The commanding officer, either amused or too tired to argue, agreed. Thus, Muriel's new role began, hauling tea equipment up and down a narrow, frozen pass to keep a dozen men mildly sane. Historians still debate whether the story's entirely true or merely based on a handful of actual mule-delivered tea tins. But soldiers wrote about her in letters. Muriel arrived like a goddess, one man penned, ears flapping, breath steaming, and that miraculous clank of the Dixie in her pack. Her arrival was often met with cheers. Not because she was particularly graceful, she once bit a sapper for walking too close, but because with her came warmth, sugar, and a break from thinking about frostbite. She became part mascot, part lifeline. When the unit moved forward to a new ridge, someone carved a teacup into her wooden saddle plate. In Muriel we trust. Quirky tidbit? Someone painted a tiny Union Jack on her tin kettle and taught her to stop when she heard a kettle whistle, whether real or imitated. Soldiers would practice the high note during rest periods, trying to get her to pause for a paw. You smile remembering that tale. Muriel the Mule. May she live forever in army lore and livestock heaven. But she wasn't the only non-human tea hero of the war. There were carrier pigeons who flew between trenches with messages and once, infamously, with a single tea bag wrapped in waxed cloth, an experiment that failed when the birds stopped for a bath in a puddle. Dogs were trained to carry small tins in their packs. One pup named Titch allegedly delivered lukewarm tea across 200 yards of open terrain under light fire, earning a biscuit and a promotion to unofficial Private Titch. But mules? Mules were the champions of the slow, steep, silent delivery. Especially in mountain campaigns where human legs gave out and tanks were as useful as teacups in a gunfight. Back in your own trench, someone's rigged up a pulley system, 2 mess tins strung between trees with a bit of rope and optimism. It's not much, but it brings the tea supplies closer to your post without walking through the worst of the muck. You call it Muriel 2.0, and no one disagrees. The tea is ready again. You don't hesitate this time. Your fingers are warmer, your spirits higher, and the brew, slightly cinnamon-scented thanks to someone's tucked-away spice sachet, is steeped just right. You sip. It's perfect. And somewhere between the taste and the steam, you think of all the ways tea gets where it needs to go. Over mountains. Through forests. Across minefields. On the back of a mule named Muriel. Because tea, in this war, is more than a drink. It's a messenger. A promise. A ridiculous, wonderful act of defiance against everything cold, cruel, and UNT-like in the universe. You drain your cup. A light snow begins to fall. You look to the end of the trench, where someone's unpacking a fresh tea crate marked "Special Issue, handle with care." You reckon Muriel would have approved? You're on the move now. Your pack digs into your shoulders, your mess tin clinks against your side, and your boots are in a long-term relationship with a patch of ankle-deep mud that refuses to let go. The company's been given orders to shift positions. Again. Another stretch of scrubland and half-frozen track winding toward somewhere that might be slightly more defensible, or just slightly less bombed. And as you march, your thoughts settle on a vital question. How are we going to make tea this time? Because even now, mid-March, under grey skies and a drizzle that's far too light to stop but far too steady to ignore, tea isn't just something you make after you get there. No, for many in the ranks, it's something you do while moving. Welcome to the strange, clumsy, almost poetic art of brewing on the march. You learned quickly that waiting for proper rest to brew was a luxury. Movement didn't mean a break from routine, it just meant adapting. Like turning your helmet into a kettle. Yes, really. You've done it more than once. Step 1. Remove the liner and hope it's not too recently used for other purposes, don't ask. Step 2. Fill it with water from your canteen or a nearby puddle that seems less suspicious than usual. Step 3. Balance it on a hot stone, a small fire, or sometimes, absurdly, on the metal casing of a still-warm engine block from a troop transport lorry. It's precarious. It's slow. It's ridiculous. And it works. Historians still argue whether field improvisation like helmet brews undermined discipline or built morale. From where you're standing, literally squelching along a muddy ridge, it's clearly the latter. There's something heroic in a man trying to make tea with his headgear while dodging Luftwaffe flyovers. You remember Evans, a wiry chap with a Lancashire accent and a tin mug wired directly to his belt. He developed a personal motto: one hand for Queen, one hand for kettle. On the march, he'd carry a small can of solid fuel and a folded windscreen made of flattened tobacco tins. He could set up a mini brew station under almost any condition. Once did it while walking. Lit it with a match in his teeth. Legendary. There's also the now famous Jeep boil. In areas where you were lucky enough to have a vehicle, soldiers learned to harness engine heat by strapping a full kettle directly to the engine block. It worked, eventually, though it occasionally resulted in tea that tasted faintly of diesel and belt grease. Still, warm tea is warm tea. You've even seen makeshift marching tea bags tucked into inside coat pockets, the body heat doing half the work during long treks. A medic once insisted the trick to a smoother march was holding your mess tin close to the chest while you walked, letting it warm against your body. It's like carrying a baby sloth, he'd joke. But thirstier. The tea itself, when brewed mid-march, is never perfect. It's gritty. It's too strong or too weak. It tastes like coat lining. But the act of brewing, now that's what matters. Because it breaks the rhythm of the trudge. One foot. Then the other. Shift the pack. Breathe. And then, stop. Just for a minute. Boil water on a rock. Watch the steam curl into the air like a flag. Sip. Walk on. Rinse. Repeat. Literally. It's not just you. All over the column, you can spot little plumes of smoke drifting up during stops. Helmets resting on tripods of sticks. Flat stones blackened with soot. Mess tins filled and placed carefully beside exhaust vents. It's like a chaotic, slow-moving tea caravan, each man with his own sacred setup. And of course, someone always forgets their tea bag. You learn to carry extras. A good man shares his leaves. A great man shares sugar. Quirky memory: during a rest break in Normandy, a soldier brewed tea using a flare casing as a makeshift kettle. Just cleaned it out, filled it with rainwater, lit a tiny fire, and steeped away. "Brightest cup I've ever had," he said, with a grin that probably deserved a medal. Marching tea was also your excuse to pause. There's no official command that says brew up now, but when enough men huddle down and clink metal together, even the most hardened officer learns to look the other way. Or join in. Once, during a long uphill slog, your lieutenant passed you and said nothing until he stopped, reached into his coat, and pulled out his own mug. You nodded. He nodded. That was the end of it. You passed him your tin. He poured. That was trust. It wasn't always so peaceful. You'll never forget the time someone tried to brew while crouching in a ditch under sporadic fire. The kettle tipped. Hot water everywhere. He yelped, and the entire squad, under tension and nerves, burst out laughing. Even the enemy held their fire for a moment. A ceasefire, once again. March brewing also gave rise to a strange sense of competition. Who could make the best cup under the worst conditions? One fellow kept a scorecard. Rated each day's brew on a scale from tinned glory to Satan's dishwater. Another swore he could tell the elevation based on how long his water took to boil. Low boil, high hill, he said. And this tastes like we're halfway up Everest. He wasn't far off. Tea became your anchor in motion. As your boots slip and slide and you feel your pack pull at your shoulders again, you notice someone just ahead of you has stopped. He's pulling out a tiny burner. Balancing it on a flat rock. Snow falling. Gloves still on. Determined. You smile. He's doing it. On the march. Just like always. You check your own tin. Still a bit of water left. Still some leaves. You sidestep off the trail, crouch behind a bush, and begin to build a tiny fire in the lee of a rock. The wind howls. The sky grumbles. Somewhere in the distance, a shout echoes from a ridge. You ignore it. Because for 5 minutes, it's tea time. You're not marching. You're not thinking about what's next. You're crouched in the mud, gently coaxing a flame to life, just to warm some water and remember who you are. Steam curls upward. You breathe in. And you sip, slowly, as the world stumbles on. You're in a different sector now, slightly drier, slightly quieter, but only just. There's a break in the sky overhead, a narrow ribbon of blue between the usual grey, and someone's claimed it's a sign. You don't ask what kind. Around here, anything above ankle-deep mud and below full-on shelling counts as good fortune. It's in moments like these that you start to notice the little cultural differences. The subtle, flavorful ones. Like how the Americans keep asking if you'd rather have coffee instead. This section of the line's got a few Yanks stationed nearby, and for all the shared hardships, there's one debate that crops up again and again. Tea versus coffee. You've heard them argue it over crates, over maps, even over a shared cigarette. And always, someone throws up their hands and says, "How can you drink that stuff?" To which the inevitable response is, "Better than brown leaf water, pal." It's not hostile, just spirited. A kind of trench-based tea party, minus the powdered wigs and with far more mud. The cultural divide is real. To the average British soldier, tea is a birthright. It is the foundation of sanity, the glue of morale, the grease in the army's wheels. It is brewed at dawn, reheated at noon, and steeped again by moonlight. To the American GI, tea is something you drink when you're sick. Maybe. If there's no coffee. And even then, only if it's got sugar and comes with a cookie. Historians still argue whether Allied command underestimated this cultural clash or simply let it simmer. After all, supply chains had to adapt. British rations prioritized tea, while American rations arrived with ground coffee, instant coffee, or, almost dreaded of all, coffee cubes. Just add hot water, stir, and prepare to feel like your tongue got mugged in an alley. One GI you knew, big guy from Minnesota, used to say, "I drink it for the pain. If it tastes good, it's suspicious." You once offered him tea. He looked at it like it was a small amphibian in a cup. Took a sip anyway. "It's gentle," he muttered. "Like a bedtime story," you offered. "Yeah," he nodded, thoughtfully. "But the story's about an old lady who makes jam." You didn't take offense. He drank the whole cup. And the next day, he asked for more. That's how it went, really. Tea versus coffee wasn't about superiority. It was about comfort zones. Each cup held a different kind of home. The British were precise. Tea came with rituals. Clean tin. Water at a proper boil. Bag in, bag out. Sugar if you could. Milk if you were blessed. It was calm, controlled, ceremonial. The Americans? They were bold. Coffee was boiled in battered pots, sometimes with eggshells thrown in to cut the bitterness. No ceremony. Just results. Caffeine, delivered fast and dirty. And yet, the lines blurred. Some Brits adopted the GI's rougher coffee habits during long stretches. Wakes the bones up, one sergeant said after his third cup of G.I. Joe. Others swore off it entirely. Tastes like burned regrets. Meanwhile, American units stationed with Brits slowly began experimenting with tea. At first, it was just politeness. Then curiosity. Then habit. One unit near Caen developed a full hybrid method, tea brewed strong, but served in coffee mugs with condensed milk and a hint of chocolate powder. They called it Victory Brew. It caught on. Quirky field anecdote, a Canadian unit once held a mock trial after their cook served tea made with coffee water. The verdict was a formal letter of complaint and a promise to reissue proper kettles. The cook responded by serving both drinks in the same mug for a week. The letter disappeared. You also heard of a French local who tried to bridge the gap entirely. Offering soldiers a mix of roasted chicory and black tea leaves, steeped together in a wine bottle with the neck sawed off. It was unique. Desperate men claimed it was full-bodied. Others claimed it was trauma in a cup. But that was the thing, tea and coffee weren't just drinks. They were identity. Mood. Memory. You sip now, crouch beside a low burner, and you're joined by an American soldier, you think his name's Turner. He's holding a steaming mess tin. Tea, he asks. You nod. And you? Coffee. I got the real stuff. You both take a sip, sitting in the silence. Then, Turner glances over. Weird, isn't it? This war. You'd think it'd break us apart. You raise your cup. Sometimes it just brews us differently. He chuckles, then offers you a sip of his coffee. You try it. Still awful. He tries your tea. Still tastes like boiled hugs, he says. You both shrug. And then you sit, together, under the thin blue ribbon of sky, sharing a moment made of steam, heat, and mutual confusion. Different drinks. Same war. Same fire. Same need to feel human. You clink mugs, wordlessly. And drink. The heat is almost unbearable now. Not the sharp chill of trench winter, not the damp bone gnaw of northern France, but something heavier. Sticky. Stubborn. You're deep in the Burmese jungle, and the air hangs low like a damp wool blanket draped across your shoulders. Every breath tastes of moss and mildew. Your shirt clings to your back, and your socks haven't been properly dry since the last monsoon. You shift your pack, swat a mosquito, and sigh. And still, even here, especially here, you think. Time for tea. Because this isn't just British territory anymore. You're fighting alongside men from India, Gurkhas, Punjabi regiments, Sikh infantry, all veterans of climates you're still struggling to spell properly. And with them comes a tea ritual of a different kind. Welcome to the chai front. You're not unfamiliar with Indian tea, chai, as they call it, but here, in the tangled green nightmare of Burma, you learn what real chai means. It isn't just boiled leaves and water. It's a performance. A potion. A minor miracle with milk, spice, and just enough sugar to make your eyebrows twitch. The first time you try it, you're in a bamboo lean-to built during a lull in the fighting. You're soaked, your boots are 2 sizes heavier than usual from mud, and someone hands you a chipped enamel cup. You raise it, expecting the usual, black, bitter, British. Instead, the scent hits you like a gentle slap. cardamom, ginger, clove, and something else, maybe cinnamon? Maybe home? You sip. And for a second, the jungle disappears. Historians still argue whether chai in Burma served a strategic or simply morale-boosting role. But you know firsthand, it gave men a reason to sit down, if only for a moment. And in a theatre where every hour brought heat stroke or leeches or ambush, sitting down was survival. The Indian troops brewed in small kettles, often blackened with use and dented from years of travel. Some carried spice sachets sewn into the linings of their coats. Others picked herbs from the jungle itself, local substitutes when proper masala couldn't be found. Peppercorn, lemongrass, even turmeric in a pinch. One Sikh havildar named Singh taught you how to froth milk by pouring the tea from one tin to another, 3 feet apart, letting it stream like a golden rope through the air. Air gives it life, he'd say with a grin, pouring it again, watching your eyebrows rise higher with every pass. It was mesmerizing. Ridiculous. Glorious. You started helping, just to be part of it. Stirring the pot. Swirling the tea leaves in that hypnotic figure 8. Even crushing a few cloves with the butt of your rifle once, feeling like you were part of something ancient. One day, Singh handed you a small wooden box. Inside, wrapped in a square of cotton, were 4 cardamom pods. He tapped the box once. For your brew. When it matters most. You've still got it. Still unopened. You told him, I'll use it when we make it home. He just smiled and said, better use it before the rats do. The jungle made you sweat in ways you didn't know were possible. Your socks grew ecosystems. Your gun rusted faster than you could oil it. And yet, chai still happened. Even during monsoon rains, someone would be crouched under a poncho, boiling water in a mess tin over a tiny cube of fuel, adding condensed milk from a dented tin and stirring with a twig. Rain hammering down, mosquitoes buzzing, rifles nearby, and still, the smell of spiced tea curling through the trees. Quirky jungle fact, some troops began drying tea leaves on the sides of their helmets during patrols. The black metal soaked up the heat, and by midday, the leaves were warm and fragrant. Solar steeping, one man called it. Field innovation, said another. Tea-powered helmet, you joked. Another time, your column came upon a disused hut, long abandoned by villagers. Inside, someone found a battered teapot buried beneath banana leaves. It had a crack down one side and a symbol no one could quite place. A Gurkha lad rubbed it clean, poured in water from his canteen, and brewed an entire batch for the unit. It was spicy, murky, and scalding hot. Best tea you'd had in weeks. A moment later, a snake dropped from the rafters and slithered into the forest. You named the pot Viper. From then on, Viper was the squad's mascot. Whenever you stopped, someone brewed in it. Eventually, it cracked for good, but not before serving nearly 50 cups and absorbing enough spice to make the entire jungle smell like cinnamon for miles. And through all of it, the heat, the marches, the sweat and monsoons, you learned that tea could be adapted. It didn't need ceremony or even good water. It just needed intention. You weren't brewing to relax. You were brewing to remember. To remind your body it could still calm down, still digest, still process more than just adrenaline and rations. Once, during a long night under a torp slick with rain, you shared a tin of chai with a Tamil rifleman. Neither of you spoke much. You didn't need to. You sat in silence, passing the cup back and forth, the jungle howling outside. He handed it back to you and said, in English, "This is what I drink when I want to stay alive." You nodded. You still think about that. The tea you drink now, crouched under a jungle fern, isn't perfect. The milk's powdered. The spice came from someone's emergency pouch. But the feeling is still there of connection, of warmth, of hope. You lift your cup. The jungle steams around you. The ground swells with heat. You drink. And it feels like a promise. The sea swells beneath your feet. Not violently, just enough to remind you that you're on something large and metal, drifting through waters that have seen better centuries. You're aboard a Royal Navy ship now, somewhere in the Atlantic or the Channel or maybe the Med, doesn't matter. All you know is there's salt in the air, grease in the stairwells, and an official boiling schedule pinned to the galley wall. Because here on the sea, tea is regulated. Welcome to life aboard a ship where kettles have ranks, and the simple act of brewing must bow to the tyranny of the clock. You're below deck, seated on a narrow bench in the mess hall, trying to drink from a cup that won't stay level. The ship lists slightly with each wave, and every sip risks becoming a lapful. A sailor across from you raises his tin mug in a solemn salute and says, "Brew o'clock, lads." You nod. Because on a Royal Navy ship, tea is not just encouraged, it is mandated. Every vessel had a boiling order. Sometimes written. Sometimes spoken. But always enforced. Boiling was done in bulk. Massive urns, gleaming like oversized artillery shells, lined the ship's galley. The tea was strong, dark, and, if you were lucky, fresh. More often, it had been sitting for a bit, brewing slowly into a concoction so intense it could have removed paint. And yet, you loved it. Historians still debate whether this Navy tea helped morale more than food or shore leave. But ask anyone who served and they'll tell you, if the tea line was moving, the ship was winning. There was a rhythm to it all. Men queued by rank, by role, by ritual. Engineers came up coated in grease, still smudged from engines. Radio officers sipped quickly between transmissions. The gun crews drank fast and hot, gulping in shifts. But no one skipped. Even during rough weather, tea was served. There are stories, some confirmed, of sailors strapping kettles to stoves to stop them sliding mid-brew. One ship in the North Sea reportedly jury-rigged a swinging galley station that could tilt with the ship's movement, allowing tea to be brewed during a storm. The kettle moved, but it never spilled. You saw it yourself once, a cook in the galley, left foot braced against a bulkhead, hand steady as a surgeon, pouring water into a dixie with the precision of a man trained for battle. Which, in a way, he was. One quirky tale you'll never forget, the three-bell brew. On some vessels, the kettle was sounded not with a call or a whistle, but by 3 taps of a wrench on a pipe. It echoed through the metal like a submarine heartbeat. First bell, get your mug. Second bell, get in line. Third bell, drink. If you missed your turn, you waited. No exceptions. Discipline was T-shaped in the Navy. Then there was the hierarchy of mugs. Some blokes used regulation cups, squat, tin, dented from years of clanging against bulkheads. Others used ceramic ones pilfered from officers' messes or picked up in some port years ago. You knew a chief petty officer who guarded a chipped mug with a faded pin-up girl on the side. He claimed it made the tea taste better. And strangely, it did. On your first naval posting, you were issued a metal cup with a handle that heated faster than the tea itself. After one unfortunate incident, your hand still bears the memory, you wrapped it in string and tape. Years later, you'd find yourself wrapping mugs the same way, out of habit. Even the Americans on board respected the ritual. They might have started the war with coffee, but one long Atlantic crossing in a storm, and they were converted. Tea's easier to keep down, one GI admitted. Doesn't feel like it's fighting you. Still, there were purists. One engineer insisted on bringing instant coffee packets and mixing them secretly into his tea. Called it battle blend. When caught, he was sentenced to a week of galley duty, not official punishment, but justice nonetheless. And it wasn't just the drink. It was the pause. The moment between watches, between missions, when the sea calmed and the deck stopped tilting just long enough to cradle a hot mug. That silence? It was sacred. You learned not to speak too much during those breaks. Just sit. Sip. Watch the sea if you were lucky enough to be near a porthole. Or just listen, the hum of the ship, the clink of mugs, the low rumble of conversation like distant thunder. You remember one night shift, deep into the Atlantic, when fog wrapped the ship like a blanket and visibility dropped to nearly nothing. Tension tightened everyone's shoulders. Orders were barked in hushed tones. Then someone passed around a flask of hot tea, and suddenly, everyone breathed again. Tea didn't fix anything. But it reminded you that you were still human. One sailor used to hum during brew-ups. Old folk songs, always in the same flat tone, always just a little too slow. He said it helped the tea steep better. Others rolled their eyes, but the tea he made was always good. And then there were the night brews, the quietest of all. Usually made in the galley after most of the crew had gone below. A few men still on duty. Red light glowing above. Kettles whispering steam. Those were your favorite. You take a sip now, the motion of the ship a gentle cradle beneath you. The tea is hot, bitter, too strong. Just right. You tap your mug once on the table. 3 times. Not for the boil. Just in memory. The barbed wire overhead looks oddly peaceful in this light, muted grey sky, a breeze just strong enough to rustle the fabric of the makeshift laundry lines, and the faint clatter of enamel mugs against the sides of trench walls. You're in a different kind of battle now. Not one of frontline skirmishes or creeping barrages, but of quiet endurance. You're in a prisoner of war camp, and yet, there's tea. You don't quite remember when it became a routine. At first, survival occupied every minute. But once the guards realized you weren't going anywhere and the fences were more secure than a bank vault, they relaxed just enough to let small routines form. One of those routines? Tea, part comfort, part currency, part cunning escape plot. The tea ration arrived irregularly. Sometimes in small bundles of loose black leaf. Sometimes in paper sachets already halfway to dust. It wasn't much. But in this place, a little meant everything. You learned fast that POW tea wasn't about flavor. It was about resourcefulness. The brews were weak, gritty, sometimes brewed 2 or 3 times, before being tossed. Milk was a fantasy, sugar a form of legend. But water, at least, could be boiled. Sometimes. And so, every day that you could, you brewed. The tin you used had once held condensed milk. Now, it bore the burn marks of a dozen makeshift stoves, some fashioned from empty food tins and broken utensils, others made from brick, string, and sheer bloody-mindedness. There were whispers early on about a fellow in Hut 3 who had made a windproof tea stove out of a discarded mess tin and the hinge of a broken latrine door. He became a hero overnight. Quirky fact, many prisoners repurposed Red Cross parcel tins as fireboxes. Punch a few holes in the side, pack them with coals or paper scraps, and you had yourself a trench-grade burner. You even saw one man using a magnifying glass and the sun to boil water, very slowly. But the tea wasn't just for drinking. It became currency. A single tea bag could be bartered for a piece of bread. 2 bags might get you a clean pair of socks. A tin of actual loose leaf? That was treasure. And everyone knew it. One morning, you watched a group of POWs sitting in a quiet circle, each with a tiny cup. No one spoke. They passed around one shared spoon and stirred in unison, as if following some ancient rite. Then, solemnly, they lifted their cups and drank. Someone whispered, "Church service has nothing on this." You believed it. Tea also became a medium for storytelling. Men would gather around a tiny flame, sipping slowly, trading memories like coins. One recounted his favorite cafe in Cairo. Another described his mother's teapot, the color of cornflowers, cracked on the side, always just about to spill. Those cups were filled with boiling water, yes, but also with home. And then came the tricks. Because with tea came opportunity. A few men, with more nerve than sense, used the brewing process to distract guards. One would light a stove too close to a fence, stirring noisily and spilling on purpose. While the guard was occupied, another would pass a message. Or test a lock. One escape attempt involved a hollow tea tin rigged to store a compass. Another involved mapping ink hidden in tea bags, smuggled into the camp by an overzealous Red Cross volunteer who just thought the lads looked undercaffeinated. Historians still debate how many successful escapes involve tea in some form. Probably not many. But a lot of attempts did. Because tea gave you time. And time gave you chances. One afternoon, you watched a fellow, quiet sort, rarely spoke, carefully set up a burner using nothing but stones and a bit of wire. He boiled his water, dropped in a pinch of leaves, and then, without a word, passed the cup to the man next to him. "I saw my daughter today," he said. No one asked how. You just let him sip in silence. That's how tea worked in camp. It was an excuse for dignity. A small rebellion against filth and fear. Once, during a rare Red Cross delivery, you received a small packet of real English breakfast, for proper tea bags, each stamped with a logo. The scent alone made someone weep. You didn't hoard it. You waited until Christmas, or something close enough, and brewed it for your hut. Weak as soup, but shared between 7 men, it tasted like a victory. And then, of course, there were the improvisers. One man tried to make tea from dried grass, convinced he could coax flavor from anything. It worked, technically. You drank it once. It tasted like lawn clippings and regret. Another tried to distill caffeine by steeping the same leaves 15 times, creating something he called black gold. It was undrinkable. But it was hot. In that camp, hot mattered. Even if it tasted like boiled sock. Tea also became art. A pal once sculpted a full teapot and cup out of clay, fired it in a small bread oven, and painted it with soot. It doesn't pour, he admitted, but it helps. He wasn't wrong. You cradle your current cup in both hands. The tea's barely tea anymore, just water with memory. But the heat warms your palms. The act grounds your thoughts. Beyond the wire, the world churns on. But for now, in here, you're not just a number in a camp. You're a person. With a cup. And with that cup, you remember who you are. You're back on the front now. The mud, the damp, the rhythmic thump of boots moving somewhere beyond the bend, it's all familiar again. But this time, you're not fumbling with matches or scrambling to light a sock-soaked burner. You're flipping through a small, creased booklet, its corners worn thin, its pages peppered with the marks of fingers long since powdered with ration dust and coal soot. You're reading official tea instructions. Yes. They really existed. Because when it came to tea, the British Army didn't leave it entirely to chance. Somewhere between bayonet practice and grenade drills, someone, somewhere, decided it was vital to include guidelines on proper tea procedure. The section is nestled in a dry-as-dust field manual titled something thrilling like Combined Forces Rations and Camp Discipline, 1939 edition. There's a whole chapter on sanitation, another on trench drainage, and, tucked away as if shy, a subsection on hot beverage preparation and morale maintenance. Historians still argue whether this inclusion was bureaucratic excess or a stroke of quiet genius. Either way, it reads like scripture in the trenches. It advises. Boil only as much water as needed to conserve fuel. Add tea leaves once water reaches a vigorous boil. Allow to steep, but avoid excessive steeping, the men dislike bitterness. Stir with clean utensil, if available. Strain, if possible, before serving. Strain, if possible. That's a laugh. You once strained your tea through a handkerchief you hadn't washed since Dunkirk. Gave it a unique flavor, somewhere between peppermint and regret. Still, it's charming in its seriousness. This idea that in the middle of a world war, someone sat down at a desk and typed out the best method for boiling a Dixie full of tea. There were diagrams, too. A sketch of a proper setup, kettle on stand, fire beneath, tin mugs arranged in neat rows. The kind of orderly brew-up that only happened in pamphlets and dreams. But what the manual never accounted for was unwritten trench tea etiquette, the rules everyone knew but no one spoke aloud. The secret code of the common mug. Like the sacred rite of the first pour. Who gets it? Usually the bloke who made the fire. Or the one with the leaf ration. Or the lad who hasn't smiled in 3 days. You learn to read faces. You offer the first cup not to the strongest or loudest, but to the quiet man in the corner. That's how it works. Then there's the last sip rule. Never leave your tin half full. Never tip out a brew unless it's actually steaming with oil slicks or, worse, someone's chewing gum. A wasted tea is an offense. Unforgivable. You also never use another man's mug. That's personal. That's intimate. Mugs are named, scratched, engraved. One lad you knew had carved MUM into his tin with a bent nail. Another had tally marks, one for every week survived. Quirky trench habit. Some men drilled small holes into the rims of their cups to whistle when the tea boiled over. A sort of battlefield tea kettle shriek. Not effective, but oddly comforting. Like your drink had opinions. You'd once seen a sergeant with a mess tin so old it had developed a wobble. Every time he set it down, it leaned slightly to the left. He never corrected it. Just sipped, grinned, and said, "She's got character." But etiquette went beyond objects. It was in how you talked about tea. There were phrases, codes, banter. Brews up meant more than just hot water, it meant a break, a breath, a heartbeat. Who's got the leaves was often followed by a dozen hands rummaging through pockets, pulling out creased packets or tins. No sugar today usually got a sigh, but never a complaint. And "it'll do" was the highest praise a trench tea could earn. You remember one freezing morning when Private Lewis brewed a cup so perfect, milky, sweet, no bits, that it was passed around the squad like a relic. For the rest of the week, he was called the alchemist. Then there were the tea tales, unwritten folklore shared during the quiet moments. The lad who saved an entire platoon with a smoke signal made from burning old tea wrappers. The corporal who brewed tea during a firefight and handed it out mid-shelling. The cook who once made a gallon of trench brew using only a single reused tea bag and sheer force of will. No one could confirm these. No one cared. They became part of the oral tradition, passed like gospel from unit to unit. One favorite involved a sergeant who kept a stash of peppermint leaves and brewed them when morale dipped too low. Called it Victory Brew. No one knew where he got them. Some say they were stolen from a general's private garden. Others claimed he got them from a French nun. All that mattered was the smell, sweet, sharp, clean. It didn't taste good. But it made people sit up straighter. And that was the point. Back in your trench, you tuck the booklet back into your coat. It's damp, a little torn, but intact. You don't read it often. But sometimes, when the sky goes that particular shade of washed-out blue, you pull it out. Remind yourself that somewhere, someone thought this mattered enough to write down. And they were right. You sip your tea now, imperfect, leaf-filled, a little too hot, and raise your mug toward the wall of the trench. For the record, you mutter, "I stirred with a clean spoon." Nobody answers. But you know they'd be proud. Dusk has settled like a fog. It's quiet, not the peaceful kind, but the kind of quiet that makes every creak of leather, every shuffle of boots, feel suspiciously loud. You're crouched low near the wire, staring out across no man's land, that strange stretch of cratered silence between two halves of a war. And then, in the most surreal twist of your life so far, someone says, "Tea? It's not a joke. Not this time." Because every now and then, rarely, quietly, and never officially, something strange happened between enemies. A shared brew. You'd heard stories, of course. Whispers passed down like myths. One from the last war, Christmas Day, 1914. Men from both sides climbing out of trenches to share cigarettes, shake hands, even play football. But you dismissed it. A fluke. A fantasy. And yet, here you are, watching something unfold that feels equally absurd. It began hours earlier, with a lull. The shelling stopped around midday. No mortars. No rifle cracks. Just wind, and the occasional chirp of a bird with no sense of time or place. Then someone on the German line raised a kettle. Slowly. Casually. held it up like a toast. Everyone froze. Someone in your unit muttered, "They're mocking us." Someone else said, "Maybe they're inviting us." Historians still argue whether these moments were genuine gestures or calculated lulls. But when you're there, in it, you don't care. The impulse isn't political. It's deeply human. So you responded. You raised your own tin mug, gave it a slow wave, and set it down visibly on the lip of the trench. A silent reply. Nothing happened for an hour. Then a shape moved between the lines. Small. Tentative. A figure hunched low, carrying something in a scarf bundle. Everyone gripped their rifles, breath caught in their throats. But the figure didn't approach. He stopped halfway. He set down the bundle. He turned. He left. You waited. Another hour passed before your sergeant gave the nod. You went out. Alone. Crouched low. Every crunch of your boots in the icy grass echoed in your ears. You reached the bundle. Inside, a tin teapot. 3 cups. A small packet of tea. A note. The note was in broken English. From some tired men to other tired men. One quiet night, please. You brought it back. No one spoke. You brewed the tea. It tasted like licorice, oddly floral, and strong enough to make your eyebrows dance. Then, someone returned the gesture. A lad named Murray packed up his tin, added 2 biscuits, a slice of canned peach, and a fresh tea bag, one of the good ones, from a Red Cross parcel, and walked it back to the halfway point. No one shot. No one shouted. And the strangest thing? You think you heard laughter. It didn't last, of course. Nothing in war does. The next morning, the shelling resumed. The sky flashed. The wire shook. The silence shattered. But for that single evening, you drank tea that had crossed enemy lines. You shared a cup with men who, by all accounts, wanted to kill you the day before, and probably would again tomorrow. And in that space between rage and rules, you remembered that even here, even now, tea could soften the edges of war. You'd keep that moment folded up in your memory like a letter you couldn't quite bring yourself to send. You'd think about it years later, over countless cups brewed in peace, brewed in kitchens, brewed on cold mornings when the kettle hissed but no one had to hide it. Because once, under barbed wire and stars, someone asked for a truce. And brought a teapot. Quirky footnote, after the war, you'd learn that a few soldiers in that sector kept the ritual alive for weeks, never acknowledged, never organized, just an unspoken agreement to pause the fire during the evening brew. One man called it the Tea Time Treaty. Never written down. Never recorded. But for the ones who lived it? Unforgettable. You sip now, in your current trench, your own tea slightly oversteeped. A bit of grit at the bottom. The usual. And you wonder, who's drinking across from you tonight? You raise your mug again, half habit, half hope. No reply. But still, you drink. You're seated on a crate now, back pressed against a sandbag wall, boots off for the first time in hours, and a mug cradled in your hands like it's the last warm thing in the world. You're not alone, 2 lads from signals are nearby, fiddling with a tangle of wires, and someone from the motor pool is snoring with his head in a helmet. And yet, even in this slouched, half-asleep sprawl of soldiers, a newspaper flutters open. Someone's reading aloud from it. A headline. Then an ad. Tea keeps Tommy on his toes. Brew up, Britain. Loose leaf, loose lips, keep the kettle boiling and the secrets safe. You smile into your cup, because now you've landed squarely in the world of tea-time propaganda. Yes, the home front had a war to fight too, and not just with coupons and blackout curtains. Tea became a symbol, a tool, and, perhaps most curiously, a form of wartime messaging that boiled quietly beneath the more obvious posters and broadcasts. Historians still argue whether these efforts were genuinely effective or simply cozy distractions, but one thing's certain, governments leaned hard into the brew. Posters went up across Britain showing cheerful housewives pouring tea for frowning soldiers who promptly turned into grinning heroes. Cartoon strips in daily papers featured Captain Cupper foiling spies with the power of proper steeping. Even in the darkest days of the Blitz, the Ministry of Information ran radio ads encouraging families to keep the kettle full and the spirit British. The implication was clear: when everything else burns, tea remains. One quirky campaign urged factory workers to pause for victory tea at 4 p.m., a national coordinated sip to match the German clock and raise British morale. Whether it worked or not is unclear, but it certainly provided a lot of people with an excuse to down tools for 10 minutes. Even the royal family got in on the act. Photographs circulated of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, not the later reigning monarch, handing cups of tea to bombed-out civilians in the East End. She smiled. They smiled. The message was loud and quiet all at once. We still have this. You remember seeing some of those posters tacked up in your staging area back in '41. Bright colors, bold slogans. A kettle with a Union Jack on it. A steam plume shaped like a V for victory. You didn't know whether to laugh or salute. But propaganda had a dark edge too. When rationing tightened and good tea grew scarce, the posters started to shift. Less cheerful. More persuasive. One featured a stern woman holding a tea tin and the words, "Is your second cup worth someone else's first?" Another showed a German U-boat and the tagline, "Loose lips sink ships. Loose tea wastes warships." That one didn't make a lot of sense, but it stuck. The government even produced educational films, grainy black and white reels played in village halls and recruitment centers. You watched one once, a cheerful man demonstrating how to stretch a single tea bag for an entire family, with cuts to grinning factory girls nodding approvingly. He used a spoon to measure out sugar, then winked at the camera and said, "Save the sweet stuff for Jerry, surrender." Propaganda turned tea into patriotism. Every sip was a quiet act of resistance. Every properly timed brew was a nod to king and country. And it worked. At least a bit. Even here, in the trench, you feel the echo of it. When someone brews a batch for the squad. When mugs are passed around like medals. When a sergeant barks, "Tea first, then orders." You feel it when the package arrives, weeks late, dented at the corners, wrapped in waxed paper. Inside, socks, biscuits, a letter from your aunt, and 3 precious packets of loose leaf, hand-labeled, for when it's truly awful. Keep warm, keep strong. You don't cry. Not quite. You just brew it. And for a moment, the poster in your memory flickers to life. Not the grinning cartoon soldier or the heroic kettle, but the simple slogan printed in faded type at the bottom. Britain is built on tea. A bit dramatic? Sure. But here, in the mud, with your tin warm and your throat less dry, you understand it. Because it isn't just a drink. It's a statement. A small, steady, boiled defiance. You take another sip. And you swear it tastes like home. You've just burned your tongue. Again. Too eager, too tired, too stubborn to wait. The tea still piping, steam curling up from your tin mug like a ghost with excellent manners, and you've scalded yourself for the 3rd time today. You grimace, then shrug. Minor price to pay. After all, you got the last of the sugar. And that's no small feat out here. Because this isn't just another trench. This is the wild, ever-shifting, morally murky world of tea rations gone missing. And make no mistake, they do go missing. Often. Suspiciously. No one talks about it officially. No one files reports. But ask around, and everyone's got a theory, a tale, or a raised eyebrow about the sudden vanishing acts of sugar tins, loose-leaf packets, and those strange, white-labeled ration cubes that never seem to last more than a day. Historians still argue whether this quiet scandal was petty theft, strategic hoarding, or just the natural consequence of desperation and cold fingers. But you've been here long enough to know the truth. It's all 3. It starts with a delay. The tea shipment doesn't arrive when it's supposed to. The quartermaster shrugs, says it's stuck in transit. You wait. And wait. And suddenly, you notice that Smith from the comms tent seems awfully perky lately. Warm hands. Clean mug. Sugar crust on his lips. You do the math. There's a running joke in your unit. The real war is in the supply tent. You laugh. Because it's funny. But also because it's true. Rations are currency, and tea is top shelf. It trades better than cigarettes, better than socks. You've seen a man swap a full tin of condensed milk for 2 bags of loose Darjeeling. You once traded a spoonful of sugar for a working lighter, and neither of you thought you were being cheated. One sergeant you knew kept a personal stash locked in an ammo box beneath his cot. Called it emergency morale. Only opened it on birthdays, Christmas, or after a particularly terrible patrol. You never saw inside, but legend had it there were real biscuits in there. Ones that weren't made of chalk and regret. Another lad fashioned a secret compartment in his backpack flap. Filled it with wrapped tea bricks and used wax paper to keep them dry. He slept with it like a pillow. Quirky detail? Some soldiers became tea smugglers. Not in the traditional, grand theft sense. Just quiet couriers of leaves and sweeteners between units. They'd move through the trenches, chatting, laughing, sharing a story, and quietly sliding a sachet from one sleeve to another. Everyone pretended not to notice. Unless you got shorted. Then it was war. You remember one bitter evening when the kitchen served up a brew so weak it looked like dishwater. Someone shouted, "Is this even tea, or just hope in a cup?" The cook didn't answer. But the next morning, a full tin of proper black tea mysteriously reappeared. No questions asked. No punishment issued. Everyone just drank. It wasn't always just personal greed. Sometimes it was supply chain breakdown. Crates would be misdelivered. Or mislabeled. Or, in one infamous case, rerouted entirely due to someone confusing tea for tobacco. That shipment ended up 3 weeks late and smelling faintly of pipe smoke. There were darker rumors too. Stories of officers hoarding tea for their own tents. Of inventory errors that always seemed to benefit the same platoon. Once, someone spread the tale that a captain's dog was getting sweetened tea every night, while the rest of the men gnawed on biscuit bricks and drank muddy runoff. Never proven. But the dog did look smug. Even the enemy got involved. In Italy, there were rumors of black market trades across lines. German troops swapping schnapps or hard candy for English tea. It sounds mad. Probably is. But you once heard a patrol return with a full tin of Yorkshire Gold and very few explanations. You didn't press. You just put the kettle on. Then there's the art of stretching the ration. A tea bag used twice. Then a third time. Then dried on a rock and used again. A pinch of sugar split 4 ways. Milk powder mixed with water, then thinned further with imagination. You became an expert in illusions. One soldier added a single clove to each pot. It didn't help the flavor, but it smelled fancy. Another started calling his daily brew tea royal and insisted on stirring it counterclockwise for good luck. It didn't taste better. But everyone smiled while they drank it. You've even tried ghost tea. That's what you call it when there's no leaf left, but you pour hot water into a mug that used to have tea in it. Swish it around. Let it pick up a whisper of flavor from the residue. Sip. Pretend. It's pathetic. It's brilliant. It's survival. And through it all, no one really complains. Not properly. Because the tea still happens. Still steams. Still provides those few minutes of quiet, of warmth, of normal. Even if someone stole the last cube of sugar. Even if the packet says a lemon infusion and tastes like boiled furniture polish. Even if you know, absolutely know, that Private Green has more in his locker than he lets on. You sip anyway. You share anyway. Because the rules may be bent, broken, burned, or buried in the bottom of a supply crate somewhere in Egypt. But tea finds a way. It always does. It's overcast today, in that pale, undecided way where the sky can't seem to commit to weather. You sit quietly near a low wall made of fieldstone and sandbags, a place that used to be a forward station, now long since abandoned to moss and lichen. Your boots are off. Your mess tin is warm. And in your hands, you hold a cup of tea that tastes almost too familiar. But this isn't a trench anymore. You're not a soldier now. You're a veteran, and for some reason, decades later, you still boil water the same way. At first, you thought it was a habit. A quirk. But now? Now it feels like muscle memory wrapped around your soul. Historians still argue whether ex-servicemen kept their wartime tea rituals out of nostalgia or necessity. But you know better. Some things just stick. You remember coming home. The first weeks. The first meals. The quiet of a kitchen without mortars in the background. The strange, deafening peace of a morning when no one barked an order. And there you were, kneeling in front of the stove, holding a scorched old tin you'd smuggled back in your duffel, watching the kettle like it might run away. You had a proper teapot now. A clean kitchen. Real sugar. Milk in a bottle. But you still brewed like you were in a trench, strong, fast, practical. It took your sister pointing it out one morning. Why are you still using that old mug? We've got plenty in the cupboard. You looked down at your cup, chipped enamel, slightly warped, the one you'd etched with your initials on a rainy day outside Salerno. The answer came slowly. Because this one works. That mug followed you through the next 40 years. You used it in the shed. On camping trips. In the garden. You brewed tea over fire pits, on gas burners, even on the back of an old engine block when your car broke down outside Leeds. You called it a field repair. Somewhere along the way, your children started calling it Dad's brew. No one touched your tin. No one used your teabag stash. They knew. Somehow, even before they understood war, they understood ritual. And you weren't alone. You'd meet old mates from the regiment, years later, and without fail someone would bring their own tea kit. Thermos. Tin mugs. One bloke even had a folding stove he'd stashed behind a fake wall during demob. Still worked. Quirky detail, your old friend Jim once told you he couldn't drink tea in silence. He'd grown so used to the background noise of a war zone that drinking in a quiet room made him anxious. So he kept a radio playing static while he brewed. Not loud. Just enough to fill the space. I like it to hum, he'd say. Tea should always come with hum. You sip now, letting the warmth travel slowly through your hands. The mug is different, newer, lighter, but the grip is the same. The first sip is cautious, the second committed. Even now, in retirement, you keep a bit of tea leaf in your jacket pocket. Habit, you tell people. Just in case. But really, it's a kind of talisman. A quiet link to the you who sat in mud and shellfire, waiting for the water to boil. Sometimes, you hear yourself give instructions to younger folks. You catch yourself saying things like, "Don't squeeze the bag, just let it sit. Boil the water, don't just heat it. Always make the first cup for someone else." You don't know if they listen. Doesn't matter. The words feel right, even now. There was a ceremony, once, a reunion. Dozens of you gathered in a field that used to be something else. You'd brought a stove. A real one. Stable. Legal. Not made from rations and half a ration tin. You brewed together. Someone passed around mugs. Someone else poured. And someone, quiet, slow-voiced, older than the war itself, said, "Still tastes like survival." You nodded. Because even now, long after the bullet stopped, the act of brewing remains the same. It's a pause. A balm. A way to say, "I'm here, I remember, I still know how to be." You take another sip. The wind's picking up. You pull your coat tighter. And you think of all the men who carried their tea habits home with them, not as burdens, but as beacons. Tiny, steaming proof that even in chaos, comfort could be made, one flame and one mug at a time. You watch the steam rise. You smile. And somewhere in the distance, a kettle starts to boil. The stars are faint tonight, soft pinpricks behind a haze of drifting cloud. You're back in the trench for one last watch before dawn, seated low on a box of empty shell casings, mug in hand, listening to the breath of the earth as it settles into another hour of uncertain quiet. This is it. The final brew before the day begins again. Your last cup before dawn. You swirl it gently, watching the surface ripple like a quiet sea. Around you, the men are murmuring in low voices or silently sipping their own. No one speaks much now. Words feel too big, too bright for a moment like this. You don't know what the day will bring. A push. A delay. Maybe nothing at all. Maybe just more mud and more silence. But this? This cup? It's real. You've brewed it carefully, more sugar than usual. The water came from a half-frozen canteen. The burner was stubborn, the flame reluctant, the tin scorched. But it boiled. It always boils in the end. You sip and let the warmth settle into your stomach like sandbags being laid just right. There's something about tea at dawn. It's not celebratory. Not exactly comforting either. It's something else. It's armor. The kind that doesn't clink or shine. The kind that lets you move without shaking, speak without shouting. The kind that lets you nod when the orders come and still, somehow, feel human. Historians don't write about the final cup. They write about strategies, about troop movements, about victories and losses measured in maps and charts. But you'll remember this. The way the cup warms your hands, the way the steam curls like breath from a sleeping dog, the way even the dirt seems to pause for just a second while you drink. Quirky little tradition you've started, you hum the same tune before every dawn cup. No one knows the words. You barely do. It's something your mum used to hum while stirring soup. And now it lives here, in the trench, in your throat, in the rhythm of the brew. You take another sip. The sky begins to pale at the edges. The dark peels away slowly, like the last bite of a biscuit dipped too long. You hear a kettle hiss. Another burner catch. Someone curses softly, then laughs. It's almost time. You drain the cup. Let the final drops linger. You wipe the rim with your thumb and tuck the mug back into your belt. It swings slightly as you stand, a weight and a memory both. One last look across the trench. The lads are rising now, some stretching, some buckling helmets, some just staring into the early blue. No orders yet. Just waiting. You whisper, not for anyone but yourself. Let the next one be just as warm. And with that, you take your place along the wall. The tea is gone. But the ritual stays. And so do you. And now, as the last of the steam fades from that final tin mug, we let the war grow distant again, its rhythms quieted, its trenches softened by time. You're no longer in mud-caked boots or fumbling with damp matches. You're tucked into your own bed now, the darkness around you safer, stiller. Maybe there's a fan humming nearby, or the whisper of street sounds outside your window. Let them fade, too. Feel the weight of the blanket, the stillness of your limbs, the warmth left behind by this long, slow walk through history. The soldiers, cold, clever, quietly stubborn, are far away now. But you shared something with them tonight, a cup, a pause, a breath. The same way they reached for a handle in the dark, you reach now for sleep. Let your mind wander back, gently, to the burner in the trench, the tin cup between your hands, the quiet camaraderie of a dozen boots in the mud. Let it all drift. Let it all settle. Inhale once, deep and steady. Exhale, slow and soft. You made it. You're warm now. You're safe. You're home. So close your eyes. Let the trench grow quiet. Let the kettle cool. And drift.